Caribou Citizen Project. And I'll just let you know that we are recording the presentation this evening so that we can share it with other people in the future. It's great to be here to give an update, share some of the results of our second summer of the Caribou surveys, and also to fill you in on what 2026 looks like for our project. I'm thrilled to see a number of our survey volunteers are here to join us. Thanks for being here tonight, and I'm excited to have Jamie and Adelie Borglum here. Jamie and Adelie were a couple of our volunteers who participated in a trip in August this past summer, and they're going to jump in later to share their experience. I'm joining tonight from Western Quebec on the unceded ancestral territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. I know we have folks all over North America, all places with their own Indigenous histories and relationships to the land. And since we're so spread out, I'd love for anyone who's willing to share in the chat where you're joining from, and if you know the Indigenous nation or treaty territory that you're on. And if you're not sure of that, I've put a link in the chat, and I'd encourage you to have a look at that resource at some point, and it might help you to learn a little bit about some of the different territories across the continent. As paddlers, I think we often begin to understand a place, certainly I do, through travel on the land and the lakes, the rivers, that we're fortunate to visit, and that kind of helps me to create my connection to a place. I've learned recently that where I am here in Wakefield, there's a movement to recognize legal rights for a very significant local river, Tanagadino-Zibi, the Gatineau River. This is a river that holds deep cultural significance for the Algonquin Anishinaabe. The rights to nature movement it's new within Western legal systems, but where there are gains being made, it honors an Indigenous worldview that understands land and water as living beings that we're in relationship with, not just resources. Friends of Wabakimi has made a commitment to honoring and respecting those relationships and connections in Wabakimi. In the Wabakimi area, the Anishinaabe people have been the caretakers of the land and water with deep connections to their ancestral land for countless generations. The area lies within the territories of Treaty 3, Treaty 9, and the Robinson Superior Treaty. Through this project and in all of our work, FOW is working to listen and learn and to help to amplify Indigenous voices to make sure that our work supports stronger relationships and ultimately works towards reconciliation. Here we go. Tonight, I'm going to start with a brief background on the project for those of you who aren't familiar with the details. I'll fill you in on all of our activities this year and, of course, the findings from the Caribou surveys. And then in the second half of the evening, I'm going to introduce the third year of the project. For those of you wondering about volunteering, Jamie and Adelie are going to share their experience, and I'll give you a few more details about what's coming up and how to get involved yourself. If you have questions, as MJ said, please, you can either save them for the end or you can write them in the chat and we'll come back to them when there's a good opportunity. Many of you are quite familiar with the project by now, but for those of you who are just learning about it, I'll take a couple minutes to give you some background. The project is a 3-year initiative to search for and document evidence of boreal caribou, in particular calving beds in the Wabakimi area. As many of you know, boreal caribou have been listed as a threatened species for quite a few years now, in Ontario since 2008 and federally in Canada since 2003. So what that status means is that without an intervention to reduce the threats to the species, the population is at a place where it's going to continue to decline over time. The most significant threat to the caribou population around Wabakimi continues to be habitat disturbance, fragmentation, and degradation, often due to resource extraction, logging, mining, road building. And then what happens is that on top of that, there's increased predation caused as a result of this changing habitat and new corridors into that habitat. Wabakimi Provincial Park does act as a population stronghold, as a protected area where fire may still impact habitat, but caribou don't face as many other disturbances. As soon as you move outside of that protected area, however, caribou are up against greater challenges and much more habitat fragmentation. The goals of the project are to empower and train wilderness paddlers as citizen scientists and promote citizen science tools to gather evidence of boreal caribou present in the Wabakimi area. So this means recruiting and training volunteers to go on our survey trips, and it's also encouraging the use of iNaturalist to expand the reach of the project across Wabakimi by engaging more people in the conservation issue. We're collecting data and submitting it to the provincial database of species at risk. Our data is helping to provide baseline information in a part of the province where there's little recent data, and specifically, it's up-to-date information and evidence about where caribou are calving and rearing their young. And then finally, we're building interest and awareness of caribou conservation and citizen science through education uh, amongst paddlers who are involved, as well as more broadly. Just a couple maps to place Wabakimi for those of you who haven't been able to visit. The place marker here in this close to the center there is indicating Wabakimi Provincial Park. It's about 240 kilometers north of Thunder Bay, Ontario. The park is at the core of this wilderness area. It's close to 900,000 hectares. The broader wilderness area also includes surrounding Crown land, other waterway parks, and conservation reserves outside of Wabakimi for a total of 2.5 million hectares. So that's if you're a paddler somewhere else, by comparison, that's roughly 3 times bigger than the combined Boundary Waters Quetico area, or 3.5 times bigger than Algonquin Park. The project is targeting lakes outside of Wabakimi, within the Crown land areas to the west, south, and southeast of the park. There is ongoing caribou monitoring that occurs within the park itself, so our data complements that, provides information about what habitat areas are important for the caribou as they move beyond those protected park boundaries. When I do presentations and in our reports, you'll notice that I don't identify lake names or specific places that we've found evidence of caribou, and the reason for that is just to minimize the potential for disturbance to animals. So even paddlers can cause stress to caribou, so we just take this precaution to minimize this chance. Caribou habitat in Ontario has been broken down into smaller geographic areas called ranges, and management occurs at the range level. So the range condition is evaluated, monitored, and the ranges are managed with respect to the particular pressures on that area and the caribou in that range, what their situation is. So our project is taking place within the Bright Sand and Nipigon ranges within the orange circle there in the center. Both of these ranges, when they were last evaluated through provincial monitoring, exceeded the threshold for habitat disturbance that caribou can tolerate and still maintain a self-sustaining population. So this is the reason that we're focused here, and that why this project is important in this particular location. So let's look at the past year 2. I want to touch on each of the 3 project goals fairly quickly, and then I'm going to dig into the survey trip results in more detail. So in terms of education and outreach, we attended five well-attended trade shows, had conversations with hundreds of visitors, hosted FOW webinars and other webinars to interested groups like field naturalist clubs, students, college students, canoe clubs that were attended by over 300 people. We're promoting citizen science. So for people who are not able or interested in participating in a project survey trip, iNaturalist is an excellent tool to broaden the scope of the project. So we have continued to promote the use of iNaturalist to report caribou observations. And of course, we had 36 volunteer paddlers who contributed as citizen scientists through their survey trips this summer. And finally, the data collected. So our team surveyed 11 lakes, or sometimes a portion of a lake, on 8 survey canoe trips, a grand total of 506 locations that were scoured for caribou sign. And the results of that search were documented and submitted to the provincial database of species at risk records. So our survey trips took place throughout the months of July and August this year. The timing is important to avoid disturbance to calving cows and very young calves earlier in the spring, and to make sure that the evidence isn't too degraded, it's not too old, as it would be later on in the fall. Those peak summer months are the ideal time for data collection. One team accessed their survey area by train this year, the rest by vehicle shuttle to the closest road access. For some teams were dropped off at the lake, right at the lake being surveyed. For others, they spent a day or two getting to their survey area. And one team had a motorboat shuttle to get them about a day's travel into their route and give them more time to spend in the area that they were surveying. They typically spent a day or two accessing their lake and then 5 to 8 days surveying. The challenges that teams encountered were the same that you might encounter on any trip in Wabakimi. So weather, bugs, certainly some bugs, and in some recent years, smoke from forest fires has become a greater issue. In the spring, there were fires close to Wabakimi on the west side of the park, but throughout the summer, these were under control. However, as most of us have experienced in many places in North America, the smoke can travel a long way and air quality can be an issue even when fires are quite far away, especially when you're on a canoe trip and you don't have a way to retreat indoors from that smoke. So that's something that our project assistant, Joni, was monitoring on a daily basis and communicating with teams about if there was any concern about smoke or fires nearby. One team, the trip that I got to be on this summer, actually saw a fire and asked Joni to call it in, and then we got to watch from our campsite as the water bomber put it out. So forest fires are top of mind during our trips these days. Our volunteers conducted surveys using a standardized protocol, which was developed in conjunction with our science advisory board. The training volunteers received in the spring helped prepare them to recognize and document evidence of caribou, including identifying scat, tracks, and hair, and what a bedding area might look like, and also how to minimize disturbance to caribou. Jamie and Natalie are going to share a bit more about what a survey looks like. We have a little video later on, so I'll just leave it at that for now. This is a glimpse into a few survey sites on the trip that I was on, and these are definitely relatively friendly sites. Any beach is a welcome landing, and we're certainly not always so fortunate. We would often encounter blowdowns. However, the goal is to try to avoid the highest density areas of heavy blowdowns because these are also areas that caribou are less likely to frequent. As a surveyor, it's important, or it's exciting to find evidence of caribou, but it's important to emphasize that every survey, whether it detects caribou or not, is contributing valuable information. So each effort adds to our understanding of caribou distribution and helps build a more complete picture of that distribution so that survey results are recorded and have been reported whether there was evidence of caribou or not. True absence data in biological survey situations is difficult to determine. Of course, there's always a chance that we missed the evidence or that the caribou passed through and didn't leave a sign. So not finding evidence during one survey does not mean that there are for sure no caribou using the habitat, but over time, the surveys can help to build a picture of caribou occupancy in the area or help to identify changes in habitat use. Our amazing crew of volunteers conducted 506 surveys this year. The survey sites were selected in order to give good distribution across each target lake based on habitat features. In the early spring, cow caribou will begin to disperse from their winter areas, and in the week before giving birth, they may travel relatively long distances, so up to a kilometer a day, to find a calving site. Cows will typically select a lake or a wetland complex that is interspersed with upland islands and peninsulas, looking for safety in an isolated location. So that island or peninsula gives protection from predators. Female caribou are most solitary during calving season. They're not grouping together with other cows, so that low density again provides safety from predators. For us, the search for the survey sites began last winter when I prepared maps of the target lakes that each volunteer team took with them into the field. To identify sites, I use a variety of maps, different satellite imagery of the lakes to find those higher quality habitat areas and islands, peninsulas, and sand beaches if they exist on that lake. And then once the teams were out in the field on the lake and can actually see the shoreline in front of them, they use their training to make the final decisions about how to spread their surveys across the lake. This year, of the 506 surveys conducted, our surveyors found evidence of caribou at 196 survey sites. So just under 39% of the sites that were surveyed, meaning 310 sites had no evidence found. In terms of distribution, I'll note that those positive evidence points where there was evidence found were concentrated on 6 of the 11 lakes that were surveyed. So it wasn't an even distribution across all of the survey areas. Now, how does it all break down? Well, as was expected, the most commonly encountered evidence was pellets or scat, found at 191 sites. At 51 sites, surveyors found a bedding area. We don't have enough evidence to call these calving beds, but they did clearly have, I'd often had multiple signs of caribou presence, often pellets or hair also in the bed. There were 60 sites with multiple types of evidence, so hair and a bed or tracks and pellets, that sort of thing. When hair was found at a site, most of the time it was found on the bedding area. In a couple instances, it was found around tracks. In the case of one of the live caribou, and this was one that I was lucky to see, after the caribou had moved out of the area, we looked on the beach where the animal was walking, and we found hair on the sand around its tracks. There wasn't evidence of it lying down, but instead it looked like it had shed off the caribou after it came out of the water. At 18 sites, surveyors found tracks, most often on sand beaches, and there were no shed antlers found. And again, several very lucky surveyors, including myself, as I mentioned, got to see live caribou at 2 different locations, both times walking on a beach. We're able to get a fair bit of information from pellets, or scat. Surveyors observed what we call pellet groups, piles of scat, at 191 survey points, so 97% of the sites where evidence was found had pellets. Using the size of the pellets, we can determine if they were from adult, yearling, or calf caribou. The majority of pellets were attributed to adult caribou, but we also did find yearling and calf pellets. And surveyors examine the pellets to decide if they're looking at recent pellets from that summer or if they're old, it's an old pile of scat from the winter or possibly from a past summer season. I took this photo this summer and it provides a perfect comparison of winter pellets versus summer pellets. Unfortunately, the caribou aren't usually quite so cooperative as to give you a comparison side by side, but in this case, it was great. So at the top of the photo here, you can see the drier, duller pellets, which are older winter pellets. And then at the bottom, these are clearly glossy, much fresher, they were relatively soft and not at all dried up, and these are summer pellets. Most of the survey sites had a few piles of pellets. 63% had between 1 and 3 pellet groups or piles. In these cases, it's likely that it's a caribou that's passing through. It's not spending a lot of time at that location. At 5 sites, however, there were over 30 piles of pellets detected. One site had 52 piles, and another had 63 pellet groups. So these clearly show a different level of use than those other sites with just a few piles. Caribou are sticking around and spending a little bit of time there. In the top left photo, you can see the pellets in the foreground, uh, and then some disturbed moss and lichen in behind. So this is one of those cases where there's pellets found at a bedding area. In the bottom left, the photo is of yearling pellets sitting on top of the moss. And very excitingly, we did find some calf pellets, which is what you're seeing on the right. These are very, very tiny. This graph shows you both the number of sites where each class of pellets was found in blue, as well as the number of pellet groups of that age class in green. So don't worry about the numbers, but with just a quick glance, you can see that the number of pellet groups in green often far exceeds the number of sites where that age class was found in blue. It was particularly obvious with the adult and yearling pellets, where it was more common to find multiple piles of a particular age category at any one survey site. And just what this shows is that the amount of use that sites are getting by each age class, so many piles of pellets at the sites, is showing us that we have some heavier use sites that were surveyed. Our surveyors found bedding areas at 51 sites spread across 6 of the lakes where evidence was found. The bedding areas found this summer included flattened ground or disturbed ground, as well as pellets at some locations. Many had caribou hair, both adult hair and what could sometimes be identified as calf hair, distributed across the bed, and well-used game trails often present in and around the bedding area. Caribou exhibit a behavior called site fidelity, meaning that they'll return to the same location to calve year after year. So this makes identifying and protecting these nursery areas really valuable when we're trying to minimize habitat disturbance and identify any areas for habitat protection. Here's a couple examples of those bedding areas in the left and middle photos. You can see the disturbed ground, and in the right-hand photos, we have caribou hair. And these are pretty obvious examples where the hair is quite evident in a clump. Sometimes it would be much less obvious, but nevertheless, it's a distinct sign of a caribou at that site not too long ago. Caribou calves are most vulnerable during their first 50 days after birth, and they'll stay for some time within a limited geographic area with their mother. The calf needs to gain strength and be strong enough to swim between islands. And then after that period of time, likely around mid-July, it's understood that the cow and calf are much more mobile and then may disperse within the nursery area in order to avoid predators. So we can certainly say that some of these areas were high use areas based on the extent of multiple bedding sites, hair, pellets, lots of trails in the area, but we don't have enough clues to call them calving beds. Of course, any caribou, whether it's a cow-calf pair or a single bull, will leave pellets and hair behind. So we need more clues to indicate that it's a calving bed specifically. One of the things that we didn't find this summer is any antlers. The female antler shed at a bedding area is a really good clue, a helpful sign that it was a calving bed, since the female loses her antlers right around the time of giving birth. So that's something that we'll continue to search for next year on future surveys. Our surveyors always visited sandy beaches on their lakes if they happened to be present. This summer, there were tracks found at 18 survey sites, almost all on sandy sand beaches. Next to a sighting of an animal, tracks are likely the most short-lived evidence that we get to see. So it's pretty neat to see tracks and kind of see the story that they tell about animals moving around. On the trip that I was on this summer, we found adult and calf tracks on a beach, and it was after we'd had a heavy rain less than 24 hours earlier. So it was quite neat to narrow the window of time and be able to know when the animals had been there. This comparison shows how difficult it can be to distinguish tracks in mud or on other surfaces. Both are clearly hooves, ungulate tracks, but in the case of the mud and grass on the right, it's difficult to say with certainty whether this is a moose or a caribou track. The data that we collect from our survey trips is submitted annually to the Ontario's Natural Heritage Information Centre, the NHIC. It's the branch of the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources that's responsible for maintaining a provincial record of species at risk. M&R staff use this database to inform forest planning and caribou habitat designations. The NHIC will share information in this database with researchers, forest management planners, conservation professionals, a wide range of people if they have a need for that information. We will also make our database directly available to other researchers and conservation professionals doing work that is aimed at the protection of boreal caribou. There is very little recent information about boreal caribou presence and distribution, particularly at the scale that we're working at in the areas that we're surveying. So this provides up-to-date records of caribou present in the area. There are range-wide surveys that have been done and are continuing to be done by the province. However, they're not done with the amount of detail that we're looking at. Those surveys help to gather bigger picture information about what's happening across the entire caribou range. And our project gathers much more detail about some of these areas that are at higher risk of habitat disturbance currently. As we continue to gather data over the rest of the project, we will be contributing to an improved understanding and documentation of caribou abundance and distribution in these high priority areas. So before we move on to talk about what's coming up next, I want to take a moment to share some thank yous. First off, I want to thank all the Indigenous communities whose territories we've traveled through in Wabakimi, in particular White Sand First Nation and the Ojibwe Nation of Saugeen, where we've sometimes spent time in their communities and certainly have worked in their territories, and so we're grateful for that welcome. I want to send A huge shout out to all of our volunteers who made the survey season happen. Anyone who goes on a wilderness canoe trip has to be willing to take on a good challenge, and our crews this year did that with enthusiasm and with real dedication. We had volunteers come from as far away as West Quebec, Winnipeg, Manitoba, all across Ontario, from Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, and they dedicated up to 2 weeks of their valuable time. We really, truly wouldn't be able to accomplish what we have without such a great team, and so I want to say thank you to each of you. I also want to thank the outfitters who've been involved in supporting our teams during the project so far. Clem Quenville, Mattice Lake Outfitters, Wabakimi Outfitters, and Wildwood. So, what's coming up next in 2026? In addition to the summer canoe surveys, we're excited to be able to conduct one winter aerial survey to add to our data collection, and that will happen early next year. And I'm going to come back to this with a bit more information in a minute. We have a full slate of survey trips lined up for next July and August, similar to this year, and we'll open the volunteer applications in early January. And this winter will again be full of outreach. We have 4 different outdoor trade shows in the winter schedule, and we're looking forward to meeting paddlers and giving presentations at some of those and spreading the word about our project and how to support the project. I'll have more information about those at the end of the presentation. The majority of caribou population statistics are gathered through aerial surveys in the winter. So there's several reasons for this. By mid to late winter, a calf born the previous spring is over 6 months old. The likelihood of survival at that point increases, so that is the counting them after they've reached that stage makes sense. The winter conditions make it easier to find, see, and count them. They're often out on the ice or visible against the snow in openings in the bush. And they have some winter behaviors that can leave evidence that can be detected in winter, even if the animal isn't actually seen. So we can sometimes, we'll know where they are, even if we don't find the animals. We'll be working with a consultant experienced in aerial caribou surveys to coordinate and carry out the survey. The goal for us is to locate caribou groups in the area of focus, which is not a well-surveyed area, and it will help to identify winter use areas within our study area. I spoke earlier about what habitat caribou are looking for their calving and nursery areas, but I'll just touch on how they move about through their range at different times of year. Despite not being migratory, boreal caribou do move within their home range from being quite solitary in their nursery and calving areas to congregating in small groups in good winter habitat. Good winter habitat means abundant lichen cover, their primary winter food source, and lower than average snow depth when possible. So you can imagine them traipsing around in the snow in Wabakimi. They're going to look for those places that are easier to move around and get through the snow to that lichen. In the early winter, so mid-November to mid-January, caribou tend to move around a little bit more, up to 2.5 kilometers a day, compared to later winter where they move much less. When caribou do head to their winter areas, they will travel up to 35 to 40 kilometers from their summer areas to get to this place where they spend that later winter time. The aerial survey will be flown likely in early February when the snow conditions are right for detecting caribou sign. Ideally, you fly at least 3 days after a significant fresh snowfall, so it's very weather dependent. The goal is to search for caribou, count the animals, and get as much demographic information like age and sex when possible. And then other valuable signs of caribou occupancy, as I mentioned, that you can detect in the winter are tracks and two other indirect signs called slushing and cratering. Slushing is what you see in this lower photo, where caribou will actually stomp up the ice and snow on a lake with their front hooves, which eventually brings water up from below that they will drink. It's not something that other ungulates do, so it's a great and very distinct sign to look for on lake ice for caribou. And then cratering is a similar behavior that caribou do to search for lichen on land in the winter. Again, in 2026, our survey trips will take place in July and August. Most trips will be 8 to 10 days in length, depending on the location and the access logistics. Most teams will base camp at one or perhaps two different locations on a lake and fan out to conduct surveys from there. So for the most part, these are not long distance travel trips. If you're used to packing up and moving every day, this is a very different type of trip. The teams will be focused on one lake or sometimes even just a part of a larger lake. And I do everything I can to accommodate the interests of volunteers and get folks out on a route that sort of makes the most of the trip for you, makes for the sort of trip that you're looking for whenever possible. So with that, a bit of background about next year, I'd like to introduce Adelie Borglum and Adelie's dad, Jamie Borglum. Adelie and Jamie were two of our intrepid volunteers this past August, and I've asked Jamie and Adelie to share their experience on their trip and to give some insight into the project from their perspective. So for now, I'm going to pass it over to Adelie and Jamie.
Hi
Thank you,
everybody.
Kate.
I'm Jamie Borglum. My daughter Adelie. Um, we are from Iowa. We have done a lot of paddling in boundary waters, and doing paddling trips all over, sea kayak trips, things like that. But I had never been to Ontario, Wabakimi. What really excited me about this trip was the idea of getting back into, real wilderness, and having an opportunity to just see a totally different part of North America, and getting farther back in there. And the opportunity to have Adelie along with me just made it all that much better with that. Go ahead, Adelie, if you want to tell a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I love paddling. I really enjoy backpacking, and I'd like to pursue wildlife biology as a career. So the opportunity to be involved hands-on in citizen science in the backcountry was just an awesome opportunity.
Our trip, we had seven of us in our group that we were doing for our trip. We got dropped off on a logging road from a outfitter. What was supposed to be a stream or river going down into the lake that we were surveying. It was about a 2 kilometer trip in there. When we got there, we got out of the van and there was no water in that river. Um, we immediately, as a group, we kind of rallied around. Okay, well, we're gonna let's see what we've got. We found basically a series of shallow, small beaver dam ponds that were, a few hundred meters long. We went over several beaver dams, got to the end of where that was, and about a kilometer at the very end, we basically had to cut portage through about a kilometer of forest into the lake that we were in. We knew that the lake that we were heading to was an important survey section, so we really wanted to make sure that we got in there. Adelie and I got when we got onto our canoes at the end, we looked at each other. We are like, "That was awesome." It was really fun. It was definitely an adventure. Um, with there, we did camp at one site, kind of in the center of the lake that we found. We did find a flat rock to land on. I think we got a video a little bit later here that talks about the rocks on this lake. Oh, I'm forgetting other things that you
Yeah,
wanted us to talk about, Kate. Please prompt us.
That's great. Maybe I'll click on to the next slide and I'll get you to talk a little bit about what your days look like.
yeah. So once we got in, we would spend about 5 to 6 hours surveying every day. Our general schedule is we'd leave about 7 in the morning, get back around 2-ish, with a stop for lunch about in the middle. The way that our group divided up is we'd have groups of two and I think one group of three spread out throughout the lake so we can cover as many points as possible. Once we got to a site, we'd look around for the easiest access point. Just because it's the easiest access point doesn't always mean it's an easy access point. But get out of the water, look for your caribou trails, and search for your pellets, and use your data collection to collect anything that you find. The thing that we found most helpful was finding trails because you'd start on one trail of caribou and you'd find more evidence, often leading to a bedding area or another piece of evidence. There was lots of bushwhacking and wet foot landings. I don't think our feet stayed dry for longer than maybe 30 minutes at any point as you're surveying. And a lot of it is being observant of where your feet are because sometimes the moss is just flat moss and other times there's a rock under the moss and other times there's a hole under the moss, which made it really fun to navigate. Following the protocol was really enjoyable. I felt that the training was really helpful and how to be most efficient in gathering that data with the limited time that you have. I found it really helpful to keep a tally sheet in order to count how many each one was and having a bag to help keep all of your gear contained. Overall, I feel like it was pretty intuitive process that I enjoyed following personally. And it made it really cool to be able to gather all that data and see that there was evidence of caribou and start to kind of learn where you think caribou are going to be, where they're not in a survey site. We found that tall islands and peninsulas had the most caribou, and that's where we would find the bedding areas, is like at the top hill. And you'd have like a circle of a trail around the island and then a little trail going up to the top. And up at the top, you'd find probably the most evidence. Anything else that you feel like I'm missing or should go a little more in depth on, Kate?
It's great. Do you want to play? Shall I play the first little video clip?
Yep.
Okay. I'll
Yeah,
just
sure.
share this, a different video. So give me 1 second here. Oh, oh, 1 second here.
What all have we found today, Adley?
We found quite a few pellets, mostly yearling, and all of them have been summer, so relatively recent. We found several calving beds today where you can see the divots in the ground and all the hair. recently they've been seeming to really like islands that are really hard to get into on the edges, but they open up on the inside underneath the pine trees and in the needles. And they really like mossy spots, seems to be where they bed down in. Where you can see where the moss has been all cleared away from them. All right, so here we have a nice bedding area. You can see really clearly the chunks of caribou hair where they're white and kinky, where they bend kind of like a straw because they're hollow. So we're going to make our marker where we're going to write down our point, which is DP3. Yeah, DP3, and then the date on there. Then we'll write what time it is. It's 12:01. And we'll write down what it is. So, bedding area. And we lay that in there with a ruler so they can get a scale for it. And we'll take a picture for our evidence.
All right. Why don't you take that one, Ellie?
Which one?
Do you have any comments about your video?
Um, I would say the one challenge with the survey equipment is that it's a little difficult when it's raining. So I found it really helpful that they have a separate waterproof notebook, especially to watch your dry erase marker as you're writing your survey pictures to make sure that your phone and your dry erase is readable as it's wet. So that would be a note that I have. Um, Other than that, I just found it really cool while surveying to kind of get a feel for what would a caribou do and where would a caribou go, and just figuring out what you think that they're gonna do and where you think that they'll enjoy, and using that data to hopefully help preserve their habitat.
Have a way to tie your things to you, like your phone, your gear, things like that.
Yeah.
As our group found, if you leave a phone in a place in the middle of the boreal forest, it is very, very hard to go back and find it. We did
Yeah.
find it amazingly, but it is very, very hard to find it.
That's a good,
I really appreciated my phone tether.
nice. What about we've got a little clip of some of the challenges of your trip, and
Yes.
these are entertaining, but I'll just wonder if you can tell me a little bit about how this trip was different than your average canoe trip.
So in Wabakimi, it's I if you've ever been to, like I'd been to the Boundary Waters like 40 times in northern Minnesota. Wabakimi made Boundary Waters feel like your local state park. There's no campsites, there's no set portages. Um, there's no great like for the lake that we were in, there's no great landings. You'll see in the video here. We were out one morning, and you'll see it in this video. So Adley and I went to the far end of the lake early morning. We wanted to hit this area of survey points, and we knew some weather might be coming in. But all of a sudden, it got so dark, we wished we had headlamps. And we looked up, and across the lake, we could see trees bending from the wind coming in. And we are like, we got to go. So we ran down to the edge of the lake, got our canoe, drug our canoe way up onto shore because we didn't want to lose that, of course. And then we had found a couple of big boulders and kind of hunkered down between these boulders to help protect ourselves. And that's part of this video is while we were in there, about 30 minutes we sat in the pouring down rain. We didn't
30
have anywhere
minutes is
else.
enough time for him to compose a song.
Let
But
me,
that's not on the video. But again, you don't have anywhere to go. So it's what can you work with where you're at. And then what the other video clip I think on here is my lamenting of rocks during lunch one day.
Cool. Thanks. I'll play this.
All right, Adley, what are we doing? Huddling under a rock from the rain. And the storm and the thunder and the wind. Got a little spider joining us. This is what you call type 2 fun. Yeah. A pretty significant blowdown area through here, where there's a lot of high stepping or over logs and in soft uh, moss.
And there'd be like the start of a little caribou trail that was
All of
nice,
these
and then it'd
really
go back in the
mossy
depth.
rocks. It's like walking on ice. And this is a good access to the island. There are no sand beaches. Rock after stubbed ankle, after busted toe, after cracked knee, after falling on your butt, soaking wet, over and over and over again. But we love it. That was very much the the experience that I think our whole group had of the lake that we were in. Good. I can't stress enough having good shoes that you don't mind having wet, but give some ankle support and things like that, because you're back in the wilderness and it's very uneven terrain that you're walking on. The only other thing quickly, Kate, that we had in our group, and I know another group that we had talked to had, was ground bees. That was definitely something that we encountered, as you'd be walking through the forest also.
Cool. Yeah, definitely some good challenges in there. Are there particular highlights that you want to point out for people now that we've done some of the challenges? What were
The
highlights that you took away from the experience?
for Adelie and I, it was a lot. I mean, we got to do this together, which was an amazing experience. As you can see, there's a picture there of me taking a nap in the afternoon. Along by, I enjoyed my naps. The silence was amazing. I don't think I've ever heard that silence level before. And just that piece of feeling like you're the first humans to ever be here, which that was amazing for me.
Yeah, the quiet was awesome. I I just love being out in the middle of nowhere and exploring. So getting to wander through the woods looking for evidence was really cool. I'm a birder, so it was really cool to hear all these birds that I don't get to hear normally. Got to see three merlins chase each other around one morning, which was a really awesome experience. Um, Really, just all the experience of that challenge and feeling like you're being a part of improving that biodiversity and citizen science was really awesome experience for me.
Cool.
And meeting new people from different parts of the continent was also
Yeah.
really neat. We had a mix of people from Winnipeg, from Toronto, from Minnesota, Iowa, and it was really neat to just hear different paddling experiences and life stories and getting to know those people and have them be your family for that week.
Nice. Thanks, Adelie. Thanks, Jamie. I did get to go on one trip this summer, but there's 8 trips over the course of the summer, so it's really neat to hear some stories, and it was fun for me to see your pictures and get a little window into your trip. So thanks for that, and for being there and for sharing your experience with us tonight. Maybe if people have questions in a few minutes for you, maybe we'll come back to you again.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So, briefly, I'm just gonna touch on a few more details about next year for anyone who's interested. Volunteers need a minimum amount of experience on a remote canoe trip, uh, of 2 or more wilderness canoe trips of 5 or more days, but more is strongly preferred. If you're not sure if you have the right experience, you can reach out to me and we can talk more about that. You should be 18 years of age or older, and as you can see and as we heard, there's a level of physical fitness that you need. You can expect bushwhacking and uneven terrain, plus all the regular canoe trip stuff like portages and full days of paddling. Volunteers need to be prepared to complete the mandatory training and cover the costs of the trip. 2 members of each group must have wilderness first aid training. And so that's something that work on matching people up so that we've got that training on every trip. You may apply as an individual or as a pair or as a group of a group of 4 or potentially more, all ready to go. Volunteers are selected based on your experience and aptitude for this type of trip, as well as a set of logistical issues like your availability and matching up a group with that first aid training. It's not always possible to get every qualified applicant on a trip, but I do my best to get as many people out as possible. Once you've been selected and matched up with a team, volunteers are required to complete an online training module so you understand the protocol, know how to use the equipment, and make sure your group as a whole is prepared to head out on your trip. Some of this you can do on your own schedule, just online, and some of it is done through webinar meetings. As with any personal canoe trip, you'll need to plan to dedicate some time before the trip to planning and organizing with your group. After your trip, you'll need to return your equipment and then plan on a little bit of time. It shouldn't take too much time, but a bit of time to transfer your data that you collect. So all of your photos and any data sheets. One way to look at this is that in terms of equipment and logistics, it's nearly the same as planning for a personal canoe trip. So volunteers are responsible for providing your own food, camping gear, canoe equipment, and you'll also need a camera or phone to take pictures with. You'll work with your group members to organize all of your equipment and your logistics. The project provides a field kit with the equipment needed for conducting the surveys, a GPS, in-reach device for regular communication, and for use in case of an emergency, and maps of the survey area, and you'll receive the caribou training before you go on your trip. The project is funded by a grant from the Caribou Conservation Stewardship Program, a program of the Government of Ontario. So we do have limited funds available to reimburse specific travel expenses up to a predetermined limit per person. But because of how remote Wabakimi is, unless you live nearby, for most volunteers, there are out-of-pocket expenses that unfortunately we're not able to cover. So we'd love to hear from you if you're interested in volunteering. The applications will be open on the FOW website on January 3rd. Applications will be reviewed as I receive them, and as soon as I have enough people to start putting teams together, I will do so. So I encourage you to apply early. I do the best that I can to give teams as much time as possible to complete the training and to prepare for your trips. So we'll try to get things moving as soon as possible, also so that everyone can make your canoe trip plans for the summer. There will be a training webinar and group meetings that take place in April and May, and then final preparations can be done in June before trips begin in July. Now, I know that not everyone is interested in a survey trip or available, so I want to share a few tips for paddlers in the area to avoid disturbing caribou and to contribute yourself with any of your own observations. You should avoid camping, stopping, bushwhacking in prime calving habitat nursery areas, particularly in May and June, and even through mid-July if possible. So that means not camping on islands or peninsulas, staying on established portage trails whenever they're available. And if you encounter fresh evidence of caribou at a campsite at any time of year, you should move on from that campsite if possible. If you see a caribou, slowly, quietly back away, never approach them or follow them. And that means making sure you're managing your beloved four-legged friends. If you do have a dog with you, make sure your dog is under control and will stay close to you, even if they're tempted by wildlife, for both you and your dog, and the wildlife safety. Practice low impact camping. There is research that's been done that shows that caribou will avoid recreation areas when there's a sensory disturbance. So that could be an outpost, areas with signs of human presence, and high traffic canoe areas. So just keeping our impact as light as possible will help with that. And then finally, document, photograph if possible, and report your sightings or observations of caribou or caribou sign, pellets, tracks, using iNaturalist. So you can report old observations. If you're just learning about this now and you can dig up a photo from a canoe trip in Wabakimi 5 years ago, we still want that report. Make sure to add it to the FOW project and the NHIC project on iNaturalist. If you aren't familiar with iNaturalist or how to join and add observations to a project, have a look at the FOW website. We've got several resources available there to help guide you to add your observation. So thanks for sticking with me. That pretty well wraps things up tonight, and I will open it up to questions in a minute. But before I do that, I just want to point out a few reminders. Again, as I said, applications will open for volunteers on January 3rd on the FOW website, so you can mark that on your calendar. We have 2 more FOW webinars scheduled this winter, and the 4 shows that we'll be at are listed here as well. So I'll leave this up for a couple minutes, at least as we take questions if there are any, and if you want to mark these dates down in your calendar, you can do so. And they're also on the FOW website and have been in newsletters that have come out recently. So you can check that if you're on our mailing list.